Picture this, America's most respected old money family, the DuPonts, with their pristine gardens and museum-quality estates. But what if I told you their fortune started with gunpowder, secret opium deals, and selling weapons to both sides of the Civil War? The DuPonts didn't just get rich, they built an empire on some of the darkest secrets in American history. And the worst part? They've been hiding it in plain sight for over 200 years. This story starts with one French immigrant who arrived in America with nothing but ambition and a willingness to do whatever it took to build a dynasty. What he did next would shock you. 2. The French immigrant's dark foundation, Eleuthère René DuPont, stepped off the boat in 1802 looking like any other French immigrant trying to make it in America. Young guy with big dreams and a head full of chemistry knowledge from working in his father's powder mills back in France. The history books love to paint this romantic picture of the American dream. Hard-working immigrant builds gunpowder empire, becomes founding father of American industry. But shipping manifests from that era tell a completely different story. The early 1800s were basically the Wild West of international trade. No DEA, no customs agents checking every cargo container, no satellite tracking. If you had the right connections and enough nerve, you could move anything across the oceans. Pierre Samuel DuPont, the family patriarch, wasn't just some bookish economist like the family biographers want you to believe. This guy had mysterious business dealings that don't add up when you look at the numbers. Gunpowder sales alone couldn't explain the rapid expansion of wealth we see in the family records. Here's where things get interesting. Historian Gerard Colby spent decades digging through old trade logs from the China route. What he found were suspicious cargo shipments that historians had ignored for over a century. Ships departing from ports the DuPonts used, carrying what manifests listed as Oriental goods and tea and textiles. Sounds innocent enough until you realize these were the exact same code words other merchants used to hide opium shipments. As the British funneled Indian opium into China, some American traders saw huge profits and used vague manifests to disguise shipments. American traders who wanted a piece of this action had to get creative with their shipping routes and documentation. Historians debate the extent of any DuPont involvement in opium. Evidence remains circumstantial. Some scholars compare Pierre Samuel DuPont's covert shipping networks to the shadowy trade routes other new money families used. The guy associated with Enlightenment thinkers and political economists? Sure, but he also had connections to maritime traders who knew exactly how to move contraband goods without getting caught. French archives show Pierre Samuel involved in various financial activities that historians describe as intentionally vague. Basically the 1800s version of offshore banking. The evidence gets even more suspicious when you look at the timing. The DuPont family's wealth grew exponentially during the exact same period when American opium smuggling hit its peak. Other families like the Astors were making fortunes in the opium trade and then spending decades trying to cover it up to maintain their respectable image. The DuPonts followed the exact same playbook. Make the dirty money, then pivot to legitimate businesses and philanthropy. Maritime insurance documents from that era contain what researchers call ambiguous references. Complaints about cargo that spoiled easily, which was merchant code for opium that needed special handling. French colonial outposts kept records showing shipments involving DuPont associates that included commodities connected to the opium supply chain. The record keeping was intentionally sloppy because everyone involved knew they were dealing with contraband. The War of 1812 gave the DuPonts perfect cover for their rapid expansion. Official contracts with the U.S. government for gunpowder provided legitimate income that could explain their growing wealth. But Colby's research suggests those government contracts were just the tip of the iceberg. The real money came from opium profits that provided the capital needed for land acquisitions, industrial ventures, and strategic partnerships with other influential families. Like Walter White mixing meth in an RV while teaching high school chemistry, the DuPonts used their legitimate gunpowder business as the perfect front operation. They had the chemistry knowledge, the international shipping connections, and the political relationships needed to move illegal drugs across continents. The only difference is they never got caught because there was basically no law enforcement capable of tracking international smuggling operations. This foundation of secret money would set the tone for generations of hidden dealings. But their most shocking betrayal was still to come, one that would test whether the DuPonts had any moral boundaries at all. 3. Playing both sides of America's bloodiest war. When your family business is literally making explosives, war should be the ultimate moral test. You pick a side and stick with it, right? Well, the DuPonts had a different strategy during the Civil War. They supplied both Union and Confederate arsenals, profiting from a war that ripped the nation apart. Henry DuPont became the family's public face during the war years. This guy was everywhere talking about Union loyalty and supporting Abraham Lincoln's cause. He made sure everyone knew the DuPont mills along the Brandywine in Delaware were the most patriotic gunpowder producers in America. The brand had serious reputation as the nation's most reliable source of black powder. But while Henry was giving speeches about Union victory, DuPont gunpowder kept showing up in Confederate hands through some very suspicious channels. The brand's prominence created what you might call opportunities for creative sales arrangements. Unscrupulous middlemen would buy DuPont powder in bulk, then quietly move the product across enemy lines by forging shipping labels to hide where the explosives were really going. Think of it like modern-day arms dealers who sell weapons to conflict zones through shell companies. Same game, different century. Here's where the story gets really interesting. War Department logs archived in the Library of Congress show officials discovered a massive shipment worth $110,000 in 1862 dollars in Confederate territory. That's roughly $3.5 million in today's money. We're not talking about a few boxes that got lost in shipping. This was enough gunpowder to supply multiple Confederate regiments for months. The seized crates were labeled for a completely fake recipient, but investigators traced them back to an intermediary who was smuggling supplies directly into Virginia. The War Department's archived logs show what happened next. Instead of investigating how America's most trusted gunpowder supplier was arming the enemy, government officials chose to cover the whole thing up. They needed DuPont's production capacity too much to risk losing their cooperation. It was like finding out your main supplier is also selling to your competition, but you're too dependent on them to do anything about it. Official logs don't name a single person responsible for approving these sales. The investigation just mysteriously stops after the confiscation. No follow-up reports, no criminal charges, no congressional hearings. The whole scandal got buried faster than a mob informant in New Jersey. References to any continued investigation simply disappear from the records, leaving the full extent of DuPont's Confederate connections deliberately unclear. There's no evidence DuPont leadership officially sanctioned sales to the Confederacy, though historians debate whether this was unauthorized middleman activity or something more coordinated. Some DuPont employees weren't buying the company's innocent act. Diaries from workers mention friction within the company about shipments that never reached their supposed Union Army destinations. These employees wrote about rumors that portions were being sold to Confederate forces, with some clerks believing that money was money and business shouldn't care about the end buyer's uniform color. When your own workers are writing about shady dealings in their personal diaries, you know something fishy is happening. The cover-up worked perfectly. Henry DuPont maintained his public image as a Union loyalist, while the family business continued profiting from both sides of America's bloodiest conflict. No major consequences ever hit the DuPont family. Anniversary publications about the company's Civil War role always emphasize how critical they were to Northern victory, conveniently skipping over that whole confiscation incident. The numbers tell the real story. DuPont's wealth grew exponentially during the war years, far beyond what Union contracts alone could explain. Other gunpowder manufacturers struggled with wartime restrictions and supply chain problems, but the DuPonts somehow managed to expand their operations and increase profits dramatically. The war became their greatest business opportunity because they figured out how to arm both sides of the conflict without facing consequences. This double-dealing strategy became the DuPont family blueprint for the next century. Maintain a respectable public image while maximizing profits through morally questionable methods. When you're rich enough and well-connected enough, you can literally profit from national tragedies and still get invited to fancy dinner parties. The Civil War taught the DuPonts that putting profit over principle wasn't just profitable. It was completely sustainable as long as you had the right government connections to protect you when things got messy. but their willingness to prioritize money over human lives was just getting started. The chemical empire's toxic secrets. By the 1900s, the DuPonts had evolved way beyond their gunpowder roots. They became chemical wizards, creating products that ended up in practically every American home. Nylon stockings, Lycra workout clothes, Kevlar bulletproof vests, and that magical non-stick coating called Teflon that made cooking so much easier. DuPont wasn't just a company anymore. It was basically the backbone of modern American life. But here's the thing about becoming too big to fail. Sometimes you also become too powerful to stop, even when you're slowly poisoning people. The crown jewel of DuPont's chemical empire was Teflon. By the 1970s and 1980s, Teflon-coated pans became nearly as common as microwaves in American kitchens. Everyone loved how eggs slid right off without sticking. DuPont was making serious money from this miracle coating, reinforcing its reputation as one of the pillars of American industry. What families didn't know was that the chemical that made Teflon possible, called PFOA, was starting to show up in some very disturbing places. Scientists inside DuPont began raising red flags about PFOA in their own research labs. Mid-20th century hazard memos introduced in later lawsuits showed company researchers discovering that tests on lab animals were revealing everything from cancer to birth defects. Think about that for a second. The company's own researchers were discovering that a key ingredient in their most profitable product was potentially deadly. But instead of hitting the brakes, DuPont executives made a calculated business decision that would make the tobacco industry proud. Much like tobacco giants, DuPont weighed profit against potential health costs and kept concerns quiet. Here's where the story gets really twisted. Internal documents that came out during lawsuits showed DuPont executives actually weighed the costs of retooling their operations versus keeping quiet about the health risks. They literally did the math and decided it was cheaper to stay silent and manage potential lawsuits down the road rather than admit their product was dangerous. It's like knowing your car's brakes are faulty, but deciding it's cheaper to pay for accident settlements than recall the vehicles. By the 1990s, affected communities in West Virginia and Ohio detected rising PFOA in water near DuPont plants, triggering lawsuits. This was decades of deliberate disposal of toxic waste that the company knew was harmful. Farmer Wilbur Tennant became the David fighting this corporate Goliath when his cattle started dying mysteriously near a DuPont facility. His cows were developing tumors, losing teeth, and acting completely bizarre. Tennant knew something was seriously wrong, but getting anyone to listen to a farmer complaining about a chemical giant seemed impossible. Tennant's persistence eventually forced DuPont to release internal documents through his lawsuit. These papers revealed a pattern that would make even the shadiest hedge fund manager blush. Company memos showed executives discussing PFOA's dangers while simultaneously expanding production. Some employees voiced concerns that were either buried in bureaucratic process or quietly hushed up. The company created a perfect storm of secrecy where dangerous information got lost or suppressed. Like those old movies where the villain explains their evil plan while the hero is tied up. DuPont's internal communications laid out exactly how they planned to handle the PFOA problem. Keep manufacturing Teflon, maximize profits during the good times, and build up legal defense funds for when the health lawsuits started rolling in. They treated potential human casualties like a line item in their budget projections. The Environmental Protection Agency finally caught up with DuPont in 2005, hitting them with a $16.5 million fine for failing to report PFOA risk data. At the time, this was the largest civil administrative penalty the EPA had ever imposed. Sounds impressive until you realize that for a company DuPont's size, $16.5 million was basically pocket change, like getting a parking ticket when you drive a Lamborghini. The real reckoning came in 2016 when DuPont agreed to a $670 million settlement to resolve thousands of claims about PFOA contamination. The settlement covered people who claimed PFOA had caused kidney cancer, testicular cancer, thyroid problems, and other serious health issues. While DuPont didn't admit wrongdoing as part of the deal, paying $670 million sends a pretty clear message about guilt. What makes this whole situation even more infuriating is how long DuPont managed to keep the lid on their toxic secret. We're talking about decades of knowing their product was poisoning people while continuing to market Teflon as safe for family kitchens. The company's own researchers were raising alarm bells while executives chose profits over public safety. But this toxic legacy was just one symptom of a deeper problem with generational wealth. When you have enough money and power, consequences become optional. And sometimes that kind of unchecked privilege creates monsters who believe they're above everything, including basic human decency. The Bloodline's hidden cost. The DuPont family figured out early that keeping money in the family required keeping marriages in the family too. Some genealogists and authors like Leonard Mosley allege repeated cousin marriages, which may have contributed to health issues such as unusual tuberculosis rates in certain branches. It's like a really messed up version of keeping your Netflix password in the family, except instead of sharing streaming services, they were sharing DNA and bank accounts. This approach worked great for protecting their fortune, but created some seriously disturbing consequences that money couldn't fix. The DuPonts treated marriage like a business merger, carefully selecting family members who would strengthen their financial position rather than their genetic health. Each wedding was basically a chess move designed to concentrate power and wealth within the bloodline. The problem is that when you concentrate wealth, you also concentrate all the genetic problems that come with it. Like European royalty who married their cousins to keep kingdoms intact, the DuPonts prioritized financial purity over genetic diversity, with potentially devastating results. Think about the Habsburg jaw, or how the British royal family had to start marrying commoners to avoid serious genetic issues. The DuPonts followed the exact same playbook, but somehow thought they could avoid the consequences that destroyed other inbred aristocratic families. They approached marriage like a stock portfolio. Keep everything internal to maximize control and minimize outside interference. The strategy involved repeated pairings of second cousins or first cousins once removed, designed to prevent the dispersion of DuPont assets and shares among outsiders. This wasn't accidental romantic attraction between family members. This was calculated estate planning disguised as love. Every marriage proposal came with spreadsheets showing how the union would affect inheritance patterns and voting control within the company. Romance took a back seat to return on investment. Tuberculosis struck certain family branches with unusual frequency, suggesting weakened immune systems from inbreeding. While tuberculosis can affect anyone, the pattern within the DuPont family suggested something more systematic was happening. Multiple family members in specific bloodlines kept getting sick with diseases that healthy immune systems should have fought off easily. It's like playing genetic Russian roulette, where each cousin marriage increased the odds of passing harmful traits to the next generation. The health problems went beyond just tuberculosis. Documented health issues appeared throughout the family tree, wherever cousin marriages had occurred most frequently. Some branches of the family developed chronic conditions that required constant medical attention. Others dealt with mental health issues that seemed to run in specific family lines. The very strategy designed to protect their wealth was slowly destroying the people it was supposed to benefit. Archivist testimony suggests medical records on congenital conditions were sometimes sanitized or withheld. According to the Hagley Museum archives, this cover-up suggests a deliberate effort to protect the DuPont image by hiding evidence of genetic problems caused by their marriage practices. Think about how tobacco companies destroyed research showing cigarettes cause cancer. The DuPonts did something similar with medical records that proved cousin marriages were making their family sick. Mosley's scholarship documents how genealogical charts from the 19th century appear sanitized or incomplete, with large swaths of personal diaries and letters remaining inaccessible. The official explanation is that these records are private or archived for family reasons, but researchers suspect a purposeful purge of embarrassing details. It's like deleting your browser history before letting someone use your computer, except instead of hiding weird Google searches, they were hiding evidence of genetic disasters. The family's obsession with secrecy extended to medical records and genealogical evidence of their breeding practices. Doctors who treated DuPont family members were reportedly asked to sign confidentiality agreements that prevented them from discussing inherited conditions. Medical files disappeared from family archives right around the time public interest in genetics and heredity started growing in the early 1900s. Each strategic marriage concentrated genetic problems, The same bloodline that controlled chemical plants and political influence also carried genes for various inherited diseases. Money could buy the best medical treatment available, but it couldn't change the fundamental genetic math that made cousin marriages dangerous. Rich or poor, biology doesn't care about your bank account when it comes to genetic diversity. The DuPont fortune came with a hidden genetic tax that money couldn't cure. They successfully kept their money in the family for generations, but they also kept passing genetic problems to their children and grandchildren. This pattern reveals something much bigger than just one family's twisted approach to wealth preservation. 7. Conclusion. The DuPont dynasty shows exactly how generational wealth operates when nobody's watching closely enough. From opium smuggling to war profiteering to poisoning families with toxic chemicals, they mastered the art of making dirty money look respectable. Their story isn't just about one family's dark secrets. It's a blueprint for how extreme wealth can hide in plain sight for centuries. Next time you see old money respectability, remember that the most polished facades often hide the darkest foundations. Understanding this history helps you spot when wealth narratives mask darker truths. Ask yourself, what other respectable dynasties might hide similar secrets behind their gilded facades? If you're seeking more investigative financial documentaries, be sure to watch the videos on my channel. Thank you for watching this video all the way to the end. If these insights resonated with you, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who could benefit from this message. Your support helps us continue creating content that empowers and inspires. I would absolutely love to hear about your thoughts. Please drop a comment below. I read every comment, and it helps me create better content for you.